Hello and welcome to our new slides over the media. Today we're going to be talking about the media, and I have a lot of links in here that have examples of what I'm talking about. When you get to the links, what I want you to do is I want you to pause this video, and then I want you to actually click on the links and watch the clip that I send you to. Some of these clips will be to YouTube, some of them will be to CBS. If a link has been taken down in the meantime, don't worry about it, just skip it and go on to the next one. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about the media. Traditionally in the United States, the media has the media has filled three roles. It currently fails to do any of these things effectively. First one is it had a watchdog effect on our government. In other words, it was there to tell us when government was doing something we didn't want them to do, to alert us to it so that we could put pressure on the government to change. It was educative. It was there to teach us about social interactions and social ideologies so that we could know what other people thought about ideas and institutions, what their opinions were, what their political ideologies were, so that we could understand one another better. And then finally, it filled the role of socialization. It taught us our basic norms and values that we needed to have in order to be effective citizens in our government. However, like I said, it currently fails to do any of the three things that we talk about here effectively. So let's talk about the role of the government, the history of media, and how everything works. First thing you need to know is that media has been protected and hated by our government since the very, very beginning of our country. It was protected by the First Amendment when we went through and created our first government. However, 10 years later, it was struck down with the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, where President John Adams actually ruled that any papers that were saying things that he didn't agree with could be shut down by the government. We see this very same thing go on over and over again throughout our history. In Vietnam versus Desert Storm, Vietnam was a war that failed in part because we covered it too closely. We had too much access to what was going on. But in Desert Storm, the government was criticized for not giving the media enough access. In Somalia versus Iraq, in Somalia, the media had so much access, they actually met our soldiers on the beaches. In Iraq, we had absolutely no access that wasn't government sanctioned. And the fact that everyone who reported over it had to be embedded with troops, which meant that they reported over something that wasn't supposed to be reported on, they could actually be tried and court-martialed in the field. And so the question has always been, what is the proper role of media with regards to the government? What is the good balance to have between knowing enough and not knowing enough, between letting the media have access to what we do versus there not being enough information out there for citizens to be able to make good decisions. So what's the history of the media in our country? Well, in the beginning, all media was local. News from other parts of the country took months to get to you because you had to arrive by mail, or it had to arrive by people traveling from location to location. So all newspapers reported a close proximity to their headquarters. And so you could basically lie to your local constituency because by the time they found out it was a lie, in many cases it was too late to do anything about it. But then we have the rise of the national media. This started with Hearst. He didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, so his father bought him a newspaper. His father made a fortune in the gold mines of California, and when his son was too lazy to do anything for a living, well, he bought him a newspaper to keep him busy. The newspaper was the San Francisco Examiner, and he was very, very successful at it, which really surprised his father and people who knew him in his young life a lot. So he started buying newspapers. He took a new invention, the telegraph, which was used to communicate back and forth across the country at the speed of light, and he would send stories back and forth between news agencies that he would buy. First, he developed a statewide paper in California, and as he spread west, he began to develop national papers. As Hearst was doing this in the West, Pulitzer was doing the same thing in the East, and they both kind of met in the middle and kept going. This created yellow journalism, because now we had two competing groups who were willing to go to war with each other to have the best news readership. And when I mean war with each other, it was really war. Newsboys would actually fight in the streets for the best places to sell papers for the two companies. So if you were in this type of a cutthroat competition and you wanted better readership, what better way to have bigger headlines, even if those headlines weren't exactly true? For example, the Spanish-American War. The battleship Maine was sitting in the harbor of Manila, Cuba, and it just exploded. No one knows why, but years later, a diver went in and discovered that the boilers were right next to the magazine. What we currently think happens is that just a random spark met the explosives and blew the entire thing up. But this wasn't discovered until discoverers went back to the spot in the 2000s. Instead, what was said was that Hertz and Pulitzer blamed the sinking of on a mine or a torpedo that was done by Spanish spies and Spanish saboteurs. They followed these stories with accounts of Spanish atrocities against the Cubans and the Filipino people. The only problem was that there were no journalists in Cuba or the Philippines. The stories were just made up. So the American people were angry, they demanded war, and so the country went to war. The problem was the soldiers would get to Cuba, they would get to the Philippines, they would be asking the local people about the atrocities, and the people would be like, what atrocities? And so they would describe the stories that were in the papers. And the people who were talking to the soldiers would say, this is the first that we've heard about this. We're very angry about this too. When did this happen? And so we went to war for completely fictional reasons. After Hertz and Pulitzer, they were kind of put down and lost their dominance because of the radio, not because of any other thing that happened. Because with the radio, you could actually hear events as they happened. I have two events here that I want you to click on and I want you to listen to. So go ahead and pause that and listen to these two events. All right, so as you can hear with Murrow reporting in World War II at the bombing of London, and you can hear with the Hindenburg explosion, that this would really get you and capture your attention, and you could hear about things not days later, but you could read about it or hear about it now instead of reading about it tomorrow. And so people bought radios so that they could keep in touch and so they could understand and they could know the news. Most news of the war occurs on the radio and in film clips much later. And here I have a film clip that I want you to watch. This is an example of a movie time clip that they would watch during the war. So go ahead and pause this and watch that. But this brings in another thing. Why listen when you can watch? Watch these next two clips. And so as you can see, getting a visual was much better than getting the audio, because now you can actually see what was happening. You could see the blood on the soldiers. You could see President Kennedy being shot. You could see so many things, and it would bring you in, it would tie you in. In the 1980s, Ted Turner realized that news could sell year-round. Once again, pause this and I want you to watch this clip. So with the beginning of CNN with Ted Turner, what you see is news now becomes a form of entertainment. And it takes on this thing that we call the 24-hour news cycle, where news is presented 24 hours a day and is presented in the form of entertainment. This leads, though, to a little bit of bias in the entertainment, because remember, education gives you a liberal bias. So what better education in the world than being a reporter, going all over the world, interviewing people from all over the world, and getting to know people from everywhere. The bias that was in this media was not intentional. Rather, it occurred because reporters assumed that everyone they knew was liberal must be moderate. Because if I know a lot of liberal people and I surround myself with liberal people, I begin to think that more and more people have this ideology. And so there was a slightly liberal bias in the media. This led to Fox News. And Fox News started off with this question: if everyone's liberal, how much money could I make if I presented news that was conservative in nature? If half the people in the world are upset with their news source, then I could make a lot of money by presenting one that they would be happy with. And so I want you to watch this clip. But I want you to understand this. This was not done because Fox was conservative. Here are 3 clips I want you to watch of the types of shows that were on Fox at this time. So we're talking about the exact same media outlet that gave us The Simpsons, that gives us currently The Family Guy, that during the 1990s was known as the premier place for African Americans to put on their TV shows, that actually pushed for minority opinions and minority viewpoints. And so they weren't known as being a conservative media outlet at this time. So why did they do it? They did it because they saw an opportunity for a lot of money to be made. But this destroyed the media. And I'm not just saying this, it really did destroy the media. Back before the invention of Fox News, we would sit around the water cooler and we would talk about a certain set of events because we all knew that those events were important. Today, we're not quite so sure. So, for example, the Russia investigations. We have CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC News, CBS News, the BBC. Everyone's reporting on this. If you listen to any of the liberal biased outlets, this is a horrible thing that needs to be looked into because we could have a president who is a traitor to our country. If you look at Fox News, this is a horrible incident. The other media outlets are just blowing things out of proportion. It's not a problem at all. So how do we know if we should be talking about this, if we should be considering this at all, if we keep getting mixed signals about the importance of this event? So what kind of things did the media used to do? Well, the media used to fulfill an educational role, where it would try to educate us about our own society and about our roles within the society and how we should actually interact with each other. Here are 3 clips that I want you guys to go through and I want you to look at. And I could go on and on and on. The watchdog role. Like I said earlier, one of the things that the media was supposed to do is it's supposed to report on events that it thought was very important and that were a problem. But like I said, with 2 different media outlets out there, different forms of media bias, how do we know whether or not we actually have a problem? For example, I want you to watch these 2 clips that come from 2 different news sources. This is an example of what the media used to do and how the media used to present problems to us. Also, we did socialization. It told you what your moral and ethics should be, so we would kind of share a similar moral and ethical framework. Here are a lot of shows that I want you to go through and look at, just so you can kind of see the moral and ethical framework. We don't get these types of shows anymore, and so we don't really get this type of socialization anymore. Now then, instead, what we do is we choose the media that we agree with instead of the one that makes us think. So if you're a conservative, you listen to Fox, and if you're a liberal, you listen to MSNBC. Why is this a problem? Well, I want you guys to look at these 2 things. These are both links talking about how CNBC actually reported on the debate in the CNN panel in the CNN debate that we had with President Trump and Hillary Clinton. And you're going to get 2 different viewpoints about how this presidential debate went, and whether or not it was biased against President Trump or not. Now, here's the thing. If I'm getting 2 different messages from 2 different sources, but I only listen to one of them, how do I know what a problem is, and how do I know what our country should be thinking about this? And so if this is the case, who do we believe and why? Truth of the matter is, you need to be a good consumer of media, and this is made harder by the War of the Worlds effect. What's the War of the Worlds effect? Well, I want you, once again, to listen to these 2 links, and I want you to pay attention to them. Have a good day. I will see you later.